The gunshot cracked through the Arizona twilight like a whip splitting dry leather. Thomas Brennan reined his horse hard, dust swirling beneath iron-shod hooves as the sound echoed off the Red Canyon walls. His hand dropped to the Colt peacemaker at his hip before his mind caught up with his instincts. 15 years since Gettysburg, and the reflexes of war still lived in his bones like unwelcome tenants who refused to leave. Another shot, then a scream. A woman's scream. Thomas was 47 years old, built like rawhide stretched over oak with gray threading through his dark hair and a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. A gift from a Confederate bayonet at Chancellorsville. A reminder that death came fast for men who hesitated. He kicked his mare into a gallop, riding toward the sound. The canyon walls rose around him like ancient sentinels, their shadows stretching long across the scrubland as the sun bled out on the western horizon. It was August 14th, 1878, and the heat of the day still radiated from the rocks like a blacksmith's forge. For just a moment, as the horse's hooves pounded the hard-packed earth, Thomas saw another time, another place. He was 19 again, lying in the mud at Chancellorsville with blood soaking through his uniform. A Confederate soldier stood over him, bayonet raised. Then darkness. When he woke, an Apache warrior was binding his wounds with strips of bark and roots, working by moonlight. "You live, soldier," the man had said in broken English. "Go home to your family." Thomas never forgot that face, never forgot that debt. The memory dissolved as he crested the ridge. Below, 2 men on horseback were circling a young Apache woman on foot, like wolves closing on a wounded deer. She moved like water between the rocks, dodging, weaving, but they were closing in. One of the men raised his pistol, taking aim at her back. Thomas didn't think. He drew and fired in one fluid motion. The first rider pitched backward off his saddle, a red bloom spreading across his chest, dead before he hit the ground. The second man, a lean figure with a scar shaped like an X across his left cheek, wheeled his horse around. Their eyes met for a split second. The man's face twisted with rage and fear. Then he spurred his mount and fled into the gathering darkness. Thomas rode down the slope at a careful pace, keeping his Colt level until he was certain the fallen man wouldn't rise again. He dismounted and approached the woman boots crunching on the gravelly soil. She was young, early 20s maybe. Apache, judging by her braided hair threaded with turquoise beads and the intricate pattern of her worn cotton dress. Her dark eyes watched him with a mixture of fear and something else. Calculation. Intelligence. The look of someone who had learned to survive by reading the intentions of strangers. "You hurt?" Thomas asked, holstering his weapon. She shook her head slowly, still watching him like a hawk watches a snake. "No. But those men, they wanted more than cattle tonight." Her English was clear, touched with the rhythm of her people. Thomas understood the implication without needing details. He'd seen what men like that did to women when there was no law to stop them. "Those men ride with anyone I should know about." "Cattle thieves," she said. "They have been raiding Apache settlements for weeks. The man who ran, he works for William Slate, the big rancher near Phoenix." Thomas knew the name. Slate was the kind of man who believed the only good Indian was a dead Indian, the kind of man Thomas had spent his adult life trying not to become. "You got somewhere safe to go?" She nodded toward the northern hills where the last light was fading to purple. "My people, 20 miles. Long walk in the dark." Thomas glanced at the body in the dust, feeling no remorse. A man who would hunt a woman like prey deserved exactly what he got. "It's dangerous, too." "I have walked longer," she said, turning toward the ridge with that same fluid grace. "And I have survived worse." Then she paused, looking back over her shoulder. The dying light caught her face, and Thomas saw something there that surprised him. Gratitude, yes, but also a fierce pride that refused to bend. "Thank you," she said. "I am called Ayanna. Among my people we do not forget those who save our lives. I will remember this debt." Before Thomas could respond, she vanished into the shadows like smoke dissolving into air. He stood there for a long moment, listening to the wind whisper through the canyon, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Then he mounted his horse and began the journey back to Crimson Valley Ranch, the encounter already settling into the back of his mind like sediment in still water. In the West, you saved who you could and buried who you couldn't. That was the only arithmetic that mattered. The ranch house appeared as a dark shape against the star-studded sky when Thomas finally rode in near midnight. A single lantern burned in the office window. Vicente was waiting, as Thomas knew he would be. The old vaquero never slept easy when Thomas was out after dark. "Señor Thomas." Vicente stood as Thomas entered, his weathered face creased with concern. The man was 70 years old, thin as jerky, with hands gnarled by decades of rope work. He'd been with the Brennan family since Thomas's father first drove stakes into this Arizona soil 40 years ago. Thomas poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, then another for Vicente. "Ran into trouble at Red Canyon. Shot a man. One of Slate's crew." Vicente's eyes narrowed. "The cattle thieves?" "The same. They were hunting an Apache woman." Thomas downed the whiskey in one swallow, welcoming the burn. "I couldn't just ride past." "Of course not, senor. You are not that kind of man." Vicente paused. "But I must tell you something. Clayton has been meeting with strangers in town 3 times this week. They wear their guns low. Bad men, I think." Thomas looked up sharply. Clayton Reeves, his foreman for 8 years, the man who'd stood beside him through drought and debt, through the losses that had nearly broken Thomas completely. "What kind of strangers?" "The kind who kill for money, senor. I do not trust them, and I do not trust why Clayton meets with them in secret." Thomas set down his glass, suddenly very tired. Too tired to deal with this now. "Keep your eyes open, old friend. If Clayton's planning something, I need to know." "Si, senor." Vicente hesitated at the door. "You should rest. You look like a man who has not slept in days." "That's because I haven't." When Vicente left, Thomas walked to his bedroom, to the small shrine he'd built in the corner. A photograph of Martha and Daniel, his wife and son. A wooden cross, a scrap of fabric from his Union uniform still stained with blood from Chancellorsville. "Martha," he whispered to the photograph. "I don't know how to go on. This ranch was supposed to be for Daniel. 3 generations of Brennan blood in this soil. Your father helped my father build this place from nothing. Now what? Who do I leave it to?" The photograph offered no answers. It never did. Martha had died 2 years ago, taken by scarlet fever in the space of a week. Daniel had followed 3 days later, 15 years old, with his whole life ahead of him. Thomas had buried them both on the hill behind the house under the cottonwood tree where Daniel used to climb as a boy. He remembered Martha's last words whispered through cracked lips as the fever consumed her. "Promise me you won't give up. Promise me you'll find something to live for again." But for 2 years, Thomas had only been going through the motions. The ranch ran itself, more or less. 25 workers, 2,000 acres, 800 head of cattle. All of it just empty numbers, without meaning, without purpose. He finished the bottle of whiskey and collapsed into bed with his boots still on. What Thomas didn't know, what no one knew, was that high in the loft of the eastern hay barn, a young Apache woman watched the ranch house with patient, calculating eyes. Ayanna had arrived 7 days ago, moving through the darkness like a spirit sleeping on straw, eating scraps from the kitchen when the cook wasn't looking. She'd tracked Thomas Brennan from the canyon, driven by the debt she'd spoken of. Among her people, an unpaid debt was a chain around the soul. Grandmother had taught her that before she died. But Ayanna had learned something else in her 7 days of observation. This ranch was not safe. The foreman, the one called Clayton Reeves, met with dangerous men. He spoke of the boss with contempt when he thought no one was listening. And every morning, Ayanna watched Thomas Brennan visit 2 graves on the hill, kneeling in silence, his shoulders bent under the weight of grief. "He saved me," she whispered to the darkness. "Now I must find a way to save him." She had no idea how soon that opportunity would come. The next morning broke hot and bright. August in Arizona Territory was a season of endurance when the land baked under a merciless sun and men moved slowly to conserve water and strength. Thomas called a meeting of his workers in the yard near the main barn at 9 o'clock. 30 men gathered, a mix of Anglo-Mexican and a few Apache. Thomas paid them all the same, a practice that earned him enemies among the neighboring ranchers, but kept good men loyal. Clayton Reeves stood at Thomas's right hand, a tall man of 38, with cold blue eyes and a Confederate cavalry scar across his forearm. He'd fought at Shiloh and Antietam, watched his 3 brothers die in Union prison camps and in an Apache raid. The war had ended 15 years ago, but Clayton had never signed the peace treaty in his heart. "The drought's getting worse," Thomas began. "We've got maybe 3 months of water left in the well. We need to move the herd east where there's still grass. Vicente will lead the crew tomorrow at first light." Clayton's jaw tightened. Always Vicente. Never him. The old Mexican got the important jobs, while Clayton, who'd given 8 years to this ranch, got treated like hired help. "Boss, I should lead that drive," Clayton said, his voice carefully neutral. "Vicente's too old for a job that big." "Vicente's got more experience moving cattle than any man here," Thomas replied. "Including me. We do this his way." The meeting broke up with the workers heading to their tasks. Clayton remained watching Thomas with barely concealed resentment. 8 years of swallowing his pride. 8 years of watching this ranch thrive under a man who thought Indians and Mexicans were equals to white men. 8 years of biding his time. That time was almost over. That afternoon, Clayton sent a telegram from the Phoenix station, carefully worded so the clerk wouldn't understand its true meaning. "Weather turning. Time to harvest. Bring the crew." The recipient, a man named Corvette, who ran a gang of cattle rustlers, and worse along the Mexican border, would understand perfectly. The old man is vulnerable. Time to move. But Clayton's plans careful, as they were hit an unexpected obstacle the next morning. An obstacle in the form of Thomas Brennan's heart suddenly forgetting how to beat. It happened without warning. Thomas was standing in the yard discussing water conservation with Vicente when a fist of fire closed around his chest. The words died in his throat. The world tilted sideways, colors bleeding into gray. He reached for something to steady himself, found only air. Then he was falling, and the red Arizona dirt rushed up to meet him like an old enemy. Chaos erupted around his crumpled body. Men shouted. Boots scrambled backward. Not one of them moved toward their fallen boss. Fear rooted them in place like fence posts. Fear of doing the wrong thing. Fear of responsibility. Fear of watching the most powerful man in the valley die at their feet. Clayton Reeves pushed through the crowd, his lean face sharp with barely concealed anticipation. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. Not the way he'd planned it, but perhaps even better. No blood on his hands, just an act of God removing the obstacle between him and everything he wanted. "Stand back," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority he'd been waiting years to claim. "Give the boss air. Someone ride for Doc Matthews in town." But no one moved to help Thomas. No one knew how. And Clayton made no move either. He just stood there watching, waiting for death to finish the job. From the hay barn loft, Ayanna saw everything. She saw Thomas fall, saw the crowd freeze, saw the foreman's cold smile, and she understood in that instant that if she didn't act, the man who'd saved her life would die in the next 4 minutes. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "When the heart forgets to beat, you must remind it. Press here. Breathe here. Do not stop until the spirit returns or crosses the dark river." Ayanna ran from the loft, her bare feet flying across the packed earth, her braided hair streaming behind her. She reached Thomas's side and dropped to her knees, pressing her ear to his chest. Silence. His heart had stopped. The spirit was already walking toward the dark river. She placed her hands on his sternum and began pressing down hard and rhythmic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Counting in Apache, the language her grandmother had taught her. 30 compressions. Then she tilted Thomas's head back, pinched his nose, and breathed into his mouth. 2 breaths. Then back to compressions. "What the hell is she doing?" Someone shouted. "Get that Apache off him, she's killing him." Ayanna ignored them. "Press, press, press. Come on. Breathe. Please breathe, you stubborn man." Then pain exploded across her back like lightning striking a tree. Clayton's rifle butt slammed into her spine with the full force of his hatred driving her forward into the dust. Fire raced through her ribs, her vision blurred with tears of agony. She heard something crack, felt something tear inside. "Don't you touch him!" Clayton snarled, raising the rifle for another blow. "Filthy savage! What kind of witchcraft are you trying?" Ayanna couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world had narrowed to a tunnel of pain and desperation, but her grandmother's voice was still there, steady as a drumbeat. "The dying do not wait for the living to feel ready. Save him now." She crawled forward, gasping, dragging herself through the dirt, and placed her trembling hands on Thomas's chest again. Press, press, press. Clayton raised his rifle butt again, and then Thomas Brennan's body jerked beneath her palms. His chest rose, fell, rose again. A ragged breath tore from his throat, then another. His eyelids fluttered, showing only the whites, but he was breathing. He was alive. The crowd fell silent, struck dumb by what they had witnessed. Ayanna slumped backward, the pain in her back roaring through her body like wildfire consuming dry timber. She had done it. She had repaid her debt. The chain around her soul was broken. But Clayton Reeves was already moving, his face twisted with fury and something else. Fear. Fear that his opportunity was slipping away. He grabbed Ayanna by the arm, hauling her upright with brutal force. His grip was iron. His breath was hot against her face. "Get this Indian witch off my ranch," he announced to the crowd, "and spread the word in town. She attacked Mr. Brennan while he was unconscious, tried to do something unnatural to him." "That is a lie," Ayanna whispered through cracked lips tasting blood. Clayton backhanded her across the face, snapping her head sideways. "Liars don't get to speak, especially not Apache liars." A small voice cried out from the crowd. "No, she saved him. I saw everything." A girl of 12 pushed through the workers. Talasi Ayanna's younger sister, who'd followed her to the ranch 3 days ago, hiding in the shadows, too scared to reveal herself until now. Clayton shoved the child aside. She fell hard, scraping her hands on the gravel. "Someone take this kid, too. Get them both out of here. Now." Vicente stepped forward, old but still strong. "Senor Clayton, this is wrong. The woman saved his life. We all saw—" 3 men materialized behind Clayton, hard-eyed strangers with their guns worn low. The men Vicente had warned Thomas about. Their message was clear without a word spoken. Vicente's protest died in his throat. By sundown, Ayanna and Talasi were gone, driven from the ranch with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Ayanna's back was a mass of purple bruising, her breathing shallow and pained, broken ribs at minimum, possibly worse. They walked north toward the Apache settlements, 20 miles through desert that would kill them if the injuries didn't. Talasi cried softly, trying to be brave. "Sister, I'm so tired." "Just a little further," Ayanna lied, knowing she might not survive the night. "We're almost home." Back at Crimson Valley Ranch, Thomas Brennan lay unconscious in his bed, unaware that the woman who'd saved his life was dying in the desert, unaware that his foreman had just seized control of everything he owned, unaware that in his office Clayton was composing another telegram. "The old man is down. Bring your men. Time to take what's ours." And in the bunkhouse, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, a young Mexican worker named Miguel clutched a wax cylinder. A phonograph recording. Evidence of everything that had happened. Evidence he was too terrified to reveal. The sun set blood-red over Crimson Valley, and the coyotes began their nightly chorus. In the darkness, debts were being paid and collected. Lives hung in the balance, and the scales of justice waited to see which way they would tip. Thomas Brennan woke on the 3rd day to the sound of wind rattling the shutters. His chest ached like someone had used it for a blacksmith's anvil. His throat was dry as desert sand. but his mind was sharp and his instincts were screaming warnings that his body was too weak to answer. Something was very wrong. The room was too quiet. The air carried a faint, acrid smell of smoke that didn't belong, and when he tried to sit up, his muscles protested with a weakness he'd never felt before, not even after taking a bayonet at Chancellorsville. The door opened. Doc Matthews entered, a round man of 60 with gray whiskers and the careful movements of someone used to dealing with fragile things. He'd been the only doctor in this part of Arizona Territory for 20 years, patching up cowboys and gunfighters with equal indifference. "Mr. Brennan," Doc Matthews said, his eyes sliding away like water off oiled leather. "Good to see you awake. You gave us quite a scare." "What happened?" Thomas's voice came out as a rasp. "Your heart stopped. Some kind of attack. Your men got you inside, kept you comfortable until I arrived. You're lucky to be alive." Thomas had been a scout during the war, spending 4 years behind enemy lines, reading lies on men's faces, tracking deception like other men tracked deer. This doctor was lying. Badly. "Which man saved me? I want to thank him personally." Doc Matthews busied himself checking Thomas's pulse, his fingers trembling slightly. "I couldn't say for certain. It was chaotic. Several men helped, I understand." "Vicente?" "Perhaps. Like I said, it was chaotic." Thomas watched the doctor's face, saw the fear there, saw the way his eyes kept darting to the door as if expecting someone to burst through. "Where is Vicente?" "I haven't seen him, Mr. Brennan. Now you need to rest. Your heart is weak. Any exertion could kill you." After the doctor left, Thomas lay still, his mind working through the pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite see. His instincts, honed by years of survival in war and wilderness, were telling him that the story he'd been given was a carefully constructed lie. He waited until nightfall. Then, despite the protests of his battered body, he rose from his bed. Every step sent pain radiating through his ribs, but Thomas Brennan had marched 30 miles on a shattered ankle after Chancellorsville. He could damn well walk across his own ranch. The main yard was dark and quiet, too quiet for a working ranch at this hour. He made his way to the barn where the incident had occurred, moving through shadows, staying low. His Colt Peacemaker hung heavy at his hip, loaded and ready. On the ground near the water trough, half buried in dust, he found something that stopped him cold. A scrap of fabric with Apache beadwork. A turquoise bead, the kind used in ceremonial dress. And near it, barely visible in the moonlight, drops of dried blood, leading away from the spot where he must have fallen. "The woman from the canyon," Thomas whispered. "Ayanna, she was here." His jaw tightened until his teeth ached. He searched further and found more. Drag marks in the dust as if someone had been pulled, scuff marks from boots, and something else. A small handprint in the dirt, child-sized, pressed deep as if the child had fallen hard. Thomas's blood ran cold. The sister, the little girl who'd cried out. He found Miguel Jr. hiding in the back of the empty bunkhouse, pressed into a corner like a trapped animal. The 19-year-old Mexican had always been quiet, nervous, the kind of young man who avoided trouble at all costs. "Miguel," Thomas said softly, closing the door behind him. "Where is everyone?" The boy's eyes were wide with terror. "Senor Brennan, they will kill me if I speak. Clayton has men watching. New men. Bad men with guns. They'll answer to me if you stay silent." Thomas knelt down, ignoring the pain in his chest. "I need to know what happened. The truth. All of it." Miguel crossed himself 3 times, lips moving in silent prayer. Then he talked. He told Thomas about the Apache girl who appeared from nowhere and knelt over his dying body when no one else would move. About the way she pressed on his chest and breathed life back into his lungs. About Clayton's rifle butt crashing into her back with enough force to crack bone. About the lies that followed the accusations of witchcraft and assault, the way she and her sister had been driven into the wilderness like rabid animals. And then Miguel told him the rest. In the 3 days Thomas had been unconscious, 200 head of cattle had vanished from the south pasture. Clayton claimed they'd wandered off, but there hadn't been any storm. The foreman had hired 6 new men, hard-eyed strangers who wore their guns low and loose like men who'd killed before and were eager to do it again. And 10 of the longtime workers, including Vicente, had been locked in the root cellar. Anyone who questioned Clayton's authority simply disappeared into that underground prison. "There is more, senor," Miguel whispered, glancing at the door. "Yesterday I was cleaning the office. I found this hidden behind the desk." He produced a wax cylinder, the kind used for Edison's phonograph recordings. Thomas had bought the machine 2 years ago, fascinated by the technology. Martha had loved it, making him record passages from her favorite books. Thomas took the cylinder with trembling fingers. "You recorded what happened?" "Si, senor. I was in the office when I heard the commotion. I started the machine and ran to the window. It captured everything, the voices, the sounds, all of it." Back in his study, Thomas locked the door and placed the cylinder on the phonograph. He turned the crank with hands that shook not from weakness, but from barely controlled rage. Static crackled. Then voices panicked, shouting the thud of boots on packed earth. And then, cutting through the chaos, a woman's voice, desperate but steady. "Come on, breathe. Please breathe, you stubborn man." The crack of wood striking flesh, a cry of pain that made Thomas's hands clench into fists. Then Clayton's voice, cold and clear. "Don't let that Apache witch touch him. Get her off. Get her off now." More sounds. A child crying. "Sister, sister, please wake up." And finally Clayton again addressing the crowd. "This woman attacked Mr. Brennan. She's dangerous, a witch. Get her out of here. Both of them." Thomas listened to the recording 3 times. Each time his expression grew harder, colder, until his face might have been carved from the same red stone as the canyon walls. Clayton Reeves had beaten the woman who saved his life, then driven her out to die, then started stealing his cattle and planning God knew what else. And all of it, while Thomas lay helpless, unaware that his entire world was being stolen from under him. He walked to the gun cabinet in his office. The lock had been broken, he noticed. Someone had been through his weapons, but they'd missed the hidden compartment his father had built into the back panel. Thomas pulled out his Colt Peacemaker and checked the cylinder. 6 rounds. He filled his gun belt with 18 more. Then he took down the Winchester repeating rifle from the wall, checked the action, and filled a leather pouch with 12 shells. Finally, he strapped his father's Bowie knife to his boot. The blade was 12 inches of folded steel forged in 1836 during the Texas Revolution. It had tasted blood before. It would again. He packed a saddlebag with bandages, carbolic acid for disinfecting wounds, laudanum for pain, and clean cloth. Then he added a canteen, some jerky, and a flask of whiskey. Before he left, Thomas wrote a letter and sealed it in an envelope addressed to Sheriff Dawson in Phoenix. He left it on his desk, where it would be found if he didn't return. The letter explained everything. The phonograph recording was wrapped carefully and placed beside it. Then Thomas Brennan, 47 years old and 3 days recovered from death, saddled his fastest horse and rode north into the darkness, following the stars toward Apache territory. The settlement was a cluster of weathered shacks and hide tents nestled against the base of a sandstone cliff. Cook fires flickered in the pre-dawn gloom. Dogs barked warnings at his approach. Thomas rode in slowly, hands visible and empty, making no sudden movements. An old woman emerged from the largest dwelling. Her face was carved with deep lines of age and hardship, her eyes sharp as obsidian blades. She wore traditional dress and carried herself with the dignity of someone who'd survived everything the world could throw at her and refused to break. "I am looking for a woman called Ayanna," Thomas said in a clear voice, removing his hat. "I mean her no harm. She saved my life. I have come to repay that debt." The old woman's expression didn't soften. "White men always speak of debts. They rarely pay them. I'm not most white men." Something shifted in her ancient gaze, recognition perhaps, or the faint ghost of hope. She pointed a gnarled finger toward the edge of the settlement, where a small shack leaned against the cliff face like a wounded animal seeking shelter. "She is dying," the woman said flatly. "The blow to her back has turned to poison in her blood. We have done what we can. It is not enough." Thomas's chest tightened like a fist closing around his heart. He dismounted and walked to the shack. The door hung from a single rusted hinge. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of fever infection and approaching death. Ayanna lay on a straw pallet, her face pale as bone and slick with sweat. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, wrong. The little girl, Talasi, knelt beside her, pressing a damp cloth to her forehead with hands that trembled with exhaustion and fear. The girl's eyes widened when she saw Thomas fill the doorway. "Please," she whispered. "Please do not hurt her. She only wanted to help." "I know." Thomas knelt beside Ayanna, his knees cracking against the hard-packed floor. "I know what she did for me, and I know what was done to her because of it." He opened his saddlebag and went to work. The wound on her back was angry and swollen, red streaks radiating outward like cracks in broken glass. Infection had taken deep root. Blood poisoning. If he didn't act fast, she'd be dead by nightfall. Thomas had learned field medicine during the war, patching up soldiers in conditions that would make most doctors weep. He'd seen men die from infected wounds more often than from the wounds themselves. Cleanliness was the key. Carbolic acid was the weapon. He cleaned the wound with carbolic acid while Ayanna moaned and thrashed weakly in her delirium. The flesh around the injury was hot to the touch, the skin tight and discolored. He used his knife sterilized in flame to drain the worst of the pus. The smell was putrid, but Thomas had smelled worse. He packed the wound with clean cloth soaked in the healing solution and bound it tight. Then he lifted her head and trickled laudanum between her cracked lips. A few drops enough to ease the fever to let her body rest and fight. "What is your name?" he asked the girl. "Talasi. I am her sister." "Talasi, can you ride a horse?" She nodded, jaw trembling but set with determination. "Your sister needs proper medicine and rest. We can't stay here, it's not safe." The old woman appeared in the doorway. "You would take them." "To a place I know. A cave in the canyons. Hidden. Safe. I'll care for her there until she's strong enough to travel. And then I'm going to take back what was stolen from me, and she's going to help me do it." The old woman studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, a gesture of respect between equals. "You are not like other white men. Perhaps there is hope for your people yet." "Don't count on it," Thomas said grimly. "Most of my people would have let her die in the desert." They sheltered in a hidden cave near a spring-fed creek 5 miles from Crimson Valley Ranch. The cave was deep and dry and visible from the main road. Thomas had used it during the Apache wars to hide from raiding parties. Both sides had used it actually. It was neutral ground known only to scouts and survivors. He built a small fire at the cave entrance, keeping it low and smokeless. Through the long night he watched Ayanna breathe, counting each rise and fall of her chest like a miser counting coins. Talasi slept curled against her sister's side, exhausted beyond the limits of her young body. Near dawn, Ayanna's fever broke. Her eyes fluttered open, clouded with confusion, but alive. Truly alive. "Where?" she croaked. "Safe," Thomas said. "You're safe. Rest." She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. "My sister." "Sleeping. She's fine." Ayanna turned her head, saw Talasi's small form beside her, and let out a long, shuddering breath. When she looked back at Thomas, there were tears on her cheeks. "You came for me. Did you think I'd let you die for saving my life?" "Most white men would have." Thomas had no answer for that, because she was right. The shame of it burned in his gut like swallowed fire. They rested through the day. Thomas cleaned Ayanna's wound again, fed her broth made from dried beef, kept the fire burning low. By evening, color had returned to her face. She could sit up, drink water, speak in full sentences without gasping. And then Thomas told her what he'd discovered. The stolen cattle, Clayton's takeover, the new gunman, the workers locked in the root cellar, the lies that had been spread about her in town. Ayanna listened without expression. When he finished, she said simply, "They have taken your ranch." "Probably. I need to know for certain before I act. I know that land, Ayanna said, her voice gaining strength. Every rock, every shadow, every blind spot in the fence line. I watched for 7 days. Thomas looked at her, this Apache woman who'd been beaten and cast out and left to die because she chose to save a stranger, who was now offering to fight beside him before her wounds had even closed. You can barely stand. Then I will crawl. She met his eyes, and there was iron in her gaze. But I will not hide in this cave while you fight alone. You saved me. Now let me help save what is yours. Thomas studied her face, saw the same determination he'd seen in his son Daniel, the same refusal to accept injustice, the same fire that had made him so proud and so terrified for the boy's future. We wait 1 more day, he said finally. You need your strength. Then we move. That night, as Ayanna slept and Talasi watched over her sister, Thomas sat at the cave entrance and looked out over the land he'd spent 20 years building, the land his father had broken, the land he'd hoped to pass to his son. Martha, he whispered to the stars, I failed to protect you from the fever, failed to save Daniel, but I won't fail to protect what you left behind. This land has Brennan blood in every acre, 3 generations of sweat and dreams. I'll be damned if I let a traitor take it. He checked his Colt Peacemaker 1 more time, counting rounds by feel in the darkness. 18 in the belt, 6 in the cylinder, 12 rifle shells, 1 Bowie knife, and a determination born of loss and rage and the simple fact that some things were worth dying for. Behind him, Ayanna's voice came soft through the darkness. You speak to your wife. Thomas didn't turn. And my son. They're buried on the ranch, under a cottonwood tree. The fever, 2 years ago. Took them both in a week. Silence. Then Ayanna said, My grandmother died 2 years ago also. She taught me everything, the healing, the old ways. When she passed, I thought my purpose died with her, but then you saved me in the canyon, and I saved you at the ranch. Perhaps the spirits brought us together for a reason. I don't believe in spirits. You do not have to believe in them for them to guide you. She paused. Tomorrow we take back your ranch. Together. Thomas finally turned to look at her silhouetted against the firelight, young and fierce and unbroken despite everything. Together, he agreed. The moon rose blood-red over Crimson Valley, painting the desert in shades of rust and shadow. And in a hidden cave 5 miles away a plan was forming, a plan born of necessity and revenge and the simple truth that some debts could only be paid in fire and blood. The second day in the cave brought Vicente. The old vaquero appeared at dawn like a ghost materializing from the desert mist. Thomas had his Winchester leveled before he recognized the weathered face and the careful way the man moved, favoring his left leg. "Senor Thomas," Vicente said, raising his hand slowly, "it is only me." Thomas lowered the rifle. "How did you find me?" "I know you, senor. 40 years I know you. When you disappeared, I knew you would come here. Your father showed me this place during the Apache wars. He said it was where enemies became brothers." Vicente limped into the cave, and Thomas saw the bruises on his face, the dried blood at his temple. "What happened?" "Clayton discovered I was asking questions. His men beat me, locked me in the root cellar with the others, but the old lock, it is weak. I know how to pick it from my days in Sonora." He smiled grimly. "Some skills you never forget." He saw Ayanna sitting up against the cave wall, Talasi beside her. His eyes widened. The Apache woman. "Dios mío! She lives." "She saved my life," Thomas said. "Clayton nearly killed her for it." Vicente crossed himself. "I tried to stop him, senor. But those new men, they have guns and no conscience. I am sorry. I should have done more." "You did what you could. Now we do what we must." Thomas gestured for Vicente to sit. "Tell me everything." Vicente spoke for 30 minutes, painting a picture darker than Thomas had imagined. Clayton had moved fast in those 3 days. The cattle theft was only the beginning. He'd forged documents claiming Thomas had sold him the ranch before his heart attack, had witnesses among his new men ready to swear to it, had even contacted a lawyer in Phoenix to make it legal. He plans to have you declared dead or incompetent, Senor. Doc Matthews has been paid to testify about your weak heart. Clayton will claim he is protecting your legacy, that you wanted him to have the ranch. And the workers, 10 in the cellar. The rest are too scared to speak. Clayton's men watch everything. They beat anyone who questions. Yesterday they killed a horse that went lame, shot it in front of everyone as a message. This is what happens to things that are no longer useful. Thomas's jaw tightened. How many guns does he have? 7 total. Clayton and 6 hired men. They patrol in pairs, sleep in shifts. They are not fools, Senor. But they think I'm either dead or too weak to fight back. See, that is their weakness. Pride. Ayanna spoke up, her voice stronger than the day before. I watched them for 7 days before Senor Brennan collapsed. I know their patterns, their blind spots. Thomas looked at her. You're still too weak to fight. I do not need to fight. I need to think, and to shoot. She held up her right hand, steady as stone. My hands work fine. I can shoot. Vicente smiled. I like this woman, Senor. She has the spirit of a warrior. She has the spirit of someone with a death wish, Thomas muttered, but he knew that look, had seen it in the mirror often enough during the war. The look of someone who'd decided that survival without honor wasn't survival at all. For the next 6 hours, they planned. Ayanna used charcoal to draw a detailed map of Crimson Valley Ranch on the smooth stone wall of the cave. Her memory was extraordinary. Every building, every fence line, every water trough. She marked the patrol routes she'd observed, the times when guards changed the places where shadows were deepest. The eastern hay barn, she said, tapping the drawing. It is the weak point. Only one guard and he drinks. I watched him for 3 nights. By midnight he is usually asleep. We burn it, Thomas said. Create chaos, draw them out. While they fight the fire, we go in from the west, Vicente added. Through the old tunnel from the well to the root cellar. Most people have forgotten it exists. Thomas nodded. His father had built that escape route during the Apache Wars, a way to flee if the ranch was ever surrounded. Only family knew about it. Only family and Vicente. I free the men in the cellar, arm them from the reserve weapons stored there. Then we have numbers. 13 against 7, Vicente calculated. Better odds. But they are professional killers, and most of our men are not, Ayanna pointed out. We need more than numbers. We need surprise, and we need to divide them. She pointed to the northern barn with its sloped roof. I go here. High ground. I can see the entire yard. I shoot any man who threatens Senor Brennan or Vicente. You've never fired a rifle in your life, Thomas said. Ayanna's eyes flashed. My grandmother's people have been hunters for 1,000 years. I can shoot a bow and arrow at 80 paces. A rifle is simply a bow that uses fire instead of string. It's not the same. Then teach me. We have time. They spent the afternoon training. Thomas had brought his Winchester and 2 boxes of ammunition. He showed Ayanna how to load, aim, and fire. She was a natural, picking up the rifle's quirks faster than most men he'd trained during the war. Breathe slow, he instructed. Let your heartbeat settle. Fire between breaths. And always aim for center mass. Don't try to be fancy. Ayanna squeezed off shot after shot at a dead tree trunk 50 yards away. Her first 3 missed. Her next 4 hit. By the 20th shot, she was grouping them tight. The bow taught me to feel the target, she explained. To become part of the weapon. The rifle is the same, just louder. Talasi watched with wide eyes. Can I learn too? No, Ayanna said firmly. You stay in this cave. You do not move until we come back. But what if you don't come back? The question hung in the air like smoke. Finally, Thomas knelt down to the girl's level. If we don't come back by dawn, you ride north to your people. Tell them what happened. Tell them Thomas Brennan died trying to make things right." Talassi's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want you to die." "None of us do, Pequeña," Vicente said gently. "But some things are worth the risk. Your sister understands this. Someday you will too." That evening, as the sun painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas sat with Ayanna near the spring. She was cleaning the Winchester with a cloth, her movements careful and precise. "Why are you really doing this?" Thomas asked. "You repaid your debt. You saved my life. You could leave. Go back to your people. Be safe." Ayanna didn't look up from her work. "What is safety?" "For 2 years I have watched my people be driven from their lands, watched them killed for sport, watched them starve because the white man took the buffalo and poisoned the water. Safety is an illusion." She set down the cloth and met his eyes. "You asked me in the canyon if I had somewhere safe to go. The truth is there is nowhere safe for people like me. Not anymore. So I choose to fight. At least that way I die on my feet instead of on my knees." Thomas understood that philosophy, had lived it during the war. "My son used to say something similar. He was 15 when the fever took him. Smart kid. Too smart, maybe. He asked me once why we had so much when the workers had so little. Why they worked as hard as we did but lived in shacks while we lived in a house." "What did you tell him?" "I told him it was just the way things were, that I paid fair wages, that I was better than most. But he looked at me with these disappointed eyes and said, 'Being better than most isn't the same as being good, Papa.'" Thomas picked up a pebble and tossed it into the spring, watching the ripples spread. "He was right. I've spent 2 years thinking about that, about how I could have done more, been better. And now I've got a second chance. If we take back the ranch, things change. No more just being better than most. We do it right. Equal pay, equal treatment, equal respect. Or what's the point of any of it?" Ayanna smiled a real smile that transformed her face from hard and guarded to something softer. "Your son would be proud." "I hope so. God, I hope so." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. Vicente was preparing a small meal over the fire, singing softly in Spanish. Talassi was already asleep, curled up in a blanket Thomas had brought. "Tell me about your grandmother," Thomas said, "the one who taught you the healing." Ayanna's expression grew distant. "She was the shaman of our people, the keeper of old knowledge. When I was 8 years old, she began teaching me how to read the plants, how to set bones, how to bring breath back to those who had stopped breathing." She paused. "The soldiers who came to our village called it witchcraft. They said we worshipped demons, but we were simply trying to heal, to help. The technique you used on me, where did she learn it?" "From a white soldier during your Civil War. He was wounded and left for dead on a battlefield. My grandmother's brother found him, brought him to our camp. The soldier taught her many things before he died. Said it was called resuscitation of the heart, that white doctors were just beginning to understand it." Thomas felt a chill run through him. "What was this soldier's name?" "I do not know. My grandmother said he spoke little, but he had a scar. Here." She traced a line from her temple to her jaw. Thomas's hand unconsciously moved to his own scar. "That was me. I was that soldier." Ayanna stared at him. "No, that cannot be." "Chancellorsville, spring of '63. I took a bayonet to the face, woke up in an Apache camp with a warrior treating my wounds. He taught me some Apache words, showed me how to track in darkness, saved my life." Thomas's voice grew thick. "Before I left, I tried to teach him what little medicine I knew from the army surgeons, how to restart a stopped heart, how to recognize blood poisoning." "That was my great-uncle," Ayanna whispered. "He died the winter before my grandmother passed. She said he always spoke of the white soldier with the face wound, said you were different from the others, that you saw people as people. The weight of that connection settled over them both. Two lives intersecting across decades, across cultures, across the vast divide of war and hatred. The world is smaller than we think, Vicente said from the fire, having listened to the entire exchange. And debts have long memories. Perhaps this is why the spirits brought you together, Señor. You saved her people saved you, and now you save each other. Thomas couldn't speak. The magnitude of it all, the circles within circles, the debts paid and repaid across generations, felt too large to comprehend. Ayana broke the silence. Tomorrow night we fight together, not as white and Apache, not as debtor and creditor, but as two people who understand that some things matter more than survival. Like justice, Thomas said. Like honor, Vicente added. Like family. Ayana finished glancing at her sleeping sister. They spent the rest of the evening refining their plan. Every detail was examined, every contingency considered. Thomas drew on his experience as a military scout, thinking through angles of attack fields, of fire escape routes if things went wrong. Vicente contributed knowledge of the ranch's rhythms, when guards would be most alert, when they'd be most complacent. He knew which workers could be trusted with weapons, which ones would fight, and which ones would simply run. Ayana brought her 7 days of observation, the patterns she'd seen, the weaknesses she'd identified. Together they created something that was more than a plan. It was a symphony of violence carefully orchestrated, timed to the minute. Phase 1 would begin at midnight. Ayana would approach the eastern hay barn under cover of darkness. The guard there, a man named Pete Morrison who drank heavily every night, would be easy to bypass. She would set the fire using 2 bottles of whiskey Thomas had brought, creating an inferno that would be visible for miles. Phase 2 would commence as soon as the alarm was raised. While Clayton's men rushed to fight the fire, Thomas and Vicente would enter through the old tunnel system. They would free the prisoners in the root cellar, arm them, and prepare for Phase 3. Phase 3 was simple. Overwhelming force from multiple directions. Vicente would lead one squad attacking from the south. Thomas would lead another from the west. Ayana would provide covering fire from the barn roof, picking off targets of opportunity. Phase 4 would be the endgame. Clayton Reeves, the man who'd betrayed everything Thomas had built, who'd beaten a woman for the crime of saving a life, who'd stolen and lied and corrupted everything he touched. That reckoning belonged to Thomas alone. What if he takes a hostage? Vicente asked. Men like Clayton, when they are cornered, they become desperate. Then we adapt, Thomas said grimly. But one way or another, this ends tomorrow night. Either we take back the ranch, or we die trying. There is no shame in the second outcome, Ayana said quietly. But I prefer the first. Vicente laughed, a sound like old leather creaking. Señor Thomas, I have known you since you were a boy. I rode with your father. I watched you grow into a man. I watched you build this ranch into something good, and I will watch you take it back, or I will die beside you. Either way, it has been an honor. Thomas gripped the old man's shoulder. The honor is mine, old friend. You've been more than an employee, more than a friend. You've been family. See, family. That is what we fight for tomorrow. Not land, not cattle, not even justice. We fight for family, for the idea that some bonds are stronger than blood. As the fire burned low and the night deepened, Thomas found himself thinking about Martha and Daniel, about the graves on the hill under the cottonwood tree, about the conversations he'd had with ghosts these past 2 years. Tomorrow he would either honor their memory or join them. Either way, the waiting would be over. The grief that had paralyzed him would transform into action. And perhaps if there was any justice in the universe, that action would mean something. Ayana approached him as he sat alone at the cave entrance, watching the stars wheel overhead. You are thinking of your family. Always. They would want you to live, not die for them. I know. But sometimes living requires risking death. Sometimes the only way forward is through fire. She sat beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. Tomorrow we walk through fire together, and we come out the other side. Both of us. You sound certain. I am. Because we have something Clayton does not. We have a reason to live that is bigger than ourselves. He fights for greed and hate. We fight for love and justice. That makes us stronger. Thomas hoped she was right. But he'd seen too much war, too much death to be certain of anything. All he knew was that tomorrow night Crimson Valley Ranch would run red with blood. And when the smoke cleared, either justice would be served, or it would lie dead in the dust alongside them. The moon rose higher, casting silver light across the desert. In the distance, coyotes sang their ancient songs, and in a hidden cave 3 warriors prepared for a battle that would determine not just the fate of a ranch, but the meaning of honor itself. Tomorrow at midnight, the reckoning would begin. The final day before the assault passed with the slow, heavy quality of a held breath. Thomas spent the morning hours teaching Vicente and Ayanna the specifics of close-quarters combat, drawing on memories he'd tried for 15 years to forget. In a gunfight, speed matters less than accuracy, he said, demonstrating the proper stance with his Colt Peacemaker. Most men panic. They fire wild, empty their cylinders into nothing but air and fear. You fire once. You make it count. Then you move to cover and reload. Vicente nodded. The old vaquero had fought bandits in Sonora 40 years ago, but his hands were steadier now than they'd been in decades. Purpose had a way of burning off the tremors of age. Ayanna watched everything with those dark, calculating eyes. She'd stripped and reassembled the Winchester 4 times that morning, learning every spring and pin until she could do it blindfolded. Now she practiced dry firing, the click of the hammer falling on empty chambers, a rhythmic punctuation to Thomas's instructions. "What about the men in the cellar?" she asked. "How do we know they will fight?" "We don't," Thomas admitted. "Some will, some won't. But the ones who do will fight hard. These men have worked for me for years. I know their families, know their stories. They're not soldiers, but they're not cowards either. And if Clayton executes them before we arrive?" The question hung cold in the desert air. Thomas had considered that possibility through the long night, had lost sleep over it. Then we avenge them, and we make sure it never happens to anyone else. Talassi sat apart from them, braiding leather strips into a bracelet with quick, nervous fingers. She hadn't spoken much since waking, her young face drawn tight with worry. Finally she approached her sister. "Ayanna, I am afraid." The Apache woman set down the rifle and pulled her sister close. "Fear is not weakness, little one. Fear is wisdom. It tells us when danger is real. The question is what we do with that fear. What if you do not come back? Then you ride north. You find our people. You tell them what happened here. You tell them that not all white men are enemies, that some are worth saving, that some debts span generations and must be honored." Ayanna held her sister's face between her hands. "And you live. You grow strong. You become the healer that grandmother trained you to be. You carry our knowledge forward. That is your duty if I fall." Talassi's eyes brimmed with tears. "I want you to stay. I want us to leave this place and never come back." "I know. But running does not end the cycle. It only delays it. Better to stand once than to run forever." Thomas watched the exchange and thought of Daniel, of the conversations they'd never finished, of the man his son would have become if fever hadn't stolen that future. He saw in Talassi the same confused courage he'd seen in his boy, the desire to be brave, warring with the instinct to survive. Vicente joined him at the cave entrance. "You think we will succeed, Senor? I think we have a chance. Maybe 30%. Maybe less. Clayton has professional killers. We have farmers and cowboys who haven't fired a gun in anger in their lives. But we have surprise. For about 5 minutes. After that it's chaos. And in chaos, anything can happen." The old vaquero pulled out a flask and took a long drink, then offered it to Thomas. "Your father once told me something. The night before a raid during the Apache Wars. He said, Vicente, fear the man who fights for gold. Respect the man who fights for glory. But never underestimate the man who fights for home. We fight for home tomorrow, senor. That counts for something. Thomas drank the whiskey, burning a trail down his throat. My father was a wise man. Wish he was here now. He'd know what to do. He is here. In you. In this ranch. In the values you carry forward. Vicente's weathered face crinkled into a sad smile. And tomorrow, win or lose, we honor his memory. That is enough. The afternoon sun climbed high and merciless. Thomas used the time to write letters. One to Sheriff Dawson explaining everything in detail. One to the territorial governor requesting an investigation into Clayton's activities. And one sealed and marked private addressed to no one. In it, he wrote to Martha and Daniel. My loves, I do not know if there is an afterlife where you can read these words, but I need to speak them anyway. I have been lost since you left, wandering through days without purpose. The ranch continued. The cattle were fed. The workers were paid. But I was just going through motions, a ghost haunting his own life. Then a woman saved me, an Apache woman named Ayanna. She brought me back from death, and in doing so she reminded me of what you always tried to teach me, that life is not about accumulating land or wealth. It is about the connections we forge, the honor we maintain, the legacy we leave. Tomorrow I fight to reclaim what was stolen, not the ranch, not the cattle, but the idea that a man's word means something, that justice is not just for the powerful, that we stand up for what is right even when it costs us everything. If I fall, know that I fell as the man you wanted me to be, not the man I was, but the man I should have been all along. Daniel, my son, I hope you would be proud. Martha, my love, I hope you would understand. Until we meet again on whatever shore awaits beyond this life. He signed it, sealed it, and placed it with the other letters. Then he checked his weapons one final time. The Colt Peacemaker gleamed with fresh oil, 6 rounds in the cylinder, 18 more on his belt. The Winchester held 15 rounds when fully loaded. He had 12 more in his saddlebag. The Bowie knife was sharp enough to shave with its edge honed to a razor line. He was as ready as he would ever be. As twilight approached, Vicente prepared a final meal. Beans and salt pork hardtack softened in coffee, dried apples for something sweet. They ate in silence, each lost in private thoughts. Ayanna barely touched her food. Thomas recognized the look. She was preparing herself mentally, walking through the plan step by step, visualizing every movement. He'd done the same thing before every battle in the war. You should eat, he said. You need strength. My body is strong enough. It is my spirit I am feeding now. She closed her eyes. My grandmother taught me a prayer for warriors before battle. Would you like to hear it? Yes. Her voice when it came was soft and rhythmic, the words in Apache flowing like water over stone. Thomas didn't understand the language, but he felt the meaning. A request for courage, for accuracy, for honor in victory or dignity in death. When she finished, the air seemed heavier, charged with something indefinable. What does it mean? Vicente asked. It asks the spirits to guide our hands and steady our hearts. It promises that if we fall with honor. And it requests that our deaths mean something, that they purchase safety for those we love. She opened her eyes. It is a prayer my people have spoken for 1,000 years. It has outlived empires. It will outlive us. Thomas felt the weight of that continuity, of standing in a line that stretched back through centuries of warriors who'd faced impossible odds and walked forward anyway. He was not Apache, but tonight he was a warrior, and warriors spoke the same language regardless of the color of their skin. We should move, Vicente said as the last light faded from the sky. It is time. They gathered their weapons in silence. Thomas helped Ayanna strap the Winchester across her back, adjusting the leather so it wouldn't chafe her still healing wounds. She moved stiffly, but without complaint. Talasi clung to her sister one last time. Come back to me. I will. I promise." It was a promise Ayanna had no right to make, but sometimes love required lies. They left the cave under the cover of full darkness, the moon not yet risen. Thomas led them on a winding path through the canyons, using every scrap of cover, moving with the caution of men who knew one mistake could end everything. 2 miles from the ranch they split up. Vicente headed south to circle around. Ayanna moved east toward her firing position. Thomas continued west, angling toward the old well and the tunnel that lay hidden beneath it. Before they parted, Thomas gripped Vicente's shoulder. "See you on the other side, old friend." "Vaya con Dios, Señor. May God go with you." To Ayanna, he said simply, "Make every shot count." "I will." "And Thomas." She used his first name for the first time. "Thank you for seeing me as human. It is rarer than you know." Then they were gone, swallowed by darkness and purpose. Thomas moved through the scrubland like smoke, using every depression in the terrain, every shadow cast by rock and cactus. His heart beat steady in his chest. No fear, no hesitation. Just the cold calculation of a man who'd done this before and survived. He reached the old well at 11:30. The moon was just beginning to rise, a thin crescent that provided barely enough light to see by. Perfect. Too little light for the guards to spot movement, but enough for him to work. The well was covered by rotting boards long since abandoned when a better water source was found closer to the house. Thomas pried up the boards, carefully mindful of noise. Below the shaft descended 20 feet into darkness. He lit a match and peered down. There, cut into the stone wall, were the handholds his father had carved 40 years ago, and at the bottom, invisible unless you knew where to look, was a narrow opening. The tunnel. Thomas lowered himself into the shaft, finding the holds by feel his boots scraping softly against stone. At the bottom he squeezed through the opening into a passage barely wide enough for his shoulders. The air was stale thick with the smell of earth and time. He crawled forward in absolute darkness, counting his breaths to measure distance. 50 breaths. 70. 100. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, pressing in from all sides, a stone throat threatening to swallow him whole. Then his outstretched hand touched wood. The hidden door into the root cellar. He paused, listening. Heard nothing. Either there was no guard inside or the man was asleep. Thomas pulled his Bowie knife and eased the door open an inch. A sliver of lamplight showed through. He opened it wider. The cellar was larger than he remembered. Barrels of whiskey lined one wall, sacks of grain lined another, and huddled in the far corner were 10 men. Vicente had been right about the count. They looked up as Thomas emerged from the tunnel, their faces gaunt from 3 days of minimal food and water. Miguel was there, the young man who'd made the recording. Maria, the cook, her face bruised, but her eyes still fierce. 3 vaqueros Thomas had known for a decade. 5 other workers whose names he knew, whose families he'd helped through hard times. "Mr. Brennan," Miguel whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief. "But they said you were dead." "Not yet." Thomas moved to the hidden weapons cache, pulling up the false floorboards. Beneath were 5 rifles, 8 pistols, and ammunition enough for a small war. "Can you fight?" Maria stood first. "Señor, I fought in the Mexican Revolution when I was 16. Give me a gun." The others rose more slowly, uncertainty warring with hope on their faces. Finally, a vaquero named Carlos spoke. "Mr. Brennan, those are professional killers up there. We are just ranch hands. I know what you are. I also know you've worked this land for years, raised your families here, buried your dead in the cemetery on the hill. This is your home as much as it's mine." Thomas began distributing weapons. "I'm not ordering you to fight. I'm asking. Help me take back what's ours. Help me show Clayton Reeves and men like him that justice still means something in this territory." One by one they took the guns, not because they were brave, but because sometimes cowardice and courage look exactly the same, and both require stepping forward into the unknown. Thomas checked his pocket watch. 11:55. 5 minutes until Ayanna lit the fire. 5 minutes until everything changed. When the alarm sounds, we move fast. Vicente will hit them from the south. We take them from the west. There's a woman on the north barn roof with a rifle. She's on our side. Do not shoot toward that position. Understood. Nods all around. Thomas could see the fear in their eyes, could smell it in the close air of the cellar. But he also saw something else. Determination. The recognition that this moment would define them for the rest of their lives. "One more thing," Thomas said. "Clayton Reeves is mine. No matter what happens, he is mine. If you see him, you leave him for me. That debt is personal." The cellar door above them was locked from the outside. Thomas positioned 2 men beneath it with rifles ready. When the chaos started, they'd blow the lock and charge out. Surprise would give them the first few seconds. After that, it would be pure violence. Thomas moved to the tunnel entrance, ready to lead the assault from outside. As he prepared to crawl back through, Miguel touched his arm. "Mr. Brennan, I am sorry for being too afraid to speak up, for hiding while that woman was beaten. I should have done more." Thomas looked at the young man's tortured face. "You did what you could. You preserved evidence. You survived to fight today. That's enough. Now make it count." He crawled back through the tunnel, emerged from the well, and positioned himself behind a water trough with a clear line of sight to the main house. His Winchester was loaded and ready. His heart beat steady and slow. Across the compound he could see the guards, 2 at the main gate, 1 wandering between the buildings. He couldn't see the hay barn guard from this angle, but if Ayanna's observations were correct, the man would be drunk or asleep by now. 11:58. Thomas thought of Martha, of Daniel, of all the years he'd spent building this ranch from raw land into something worth fighting for, of the values he'd tried to instill, of the legacy he'd tried to create. Tonight, that legacy would be tested in fire and blood. 11:59. He could see Ayanna now, a shadow moving along the eastern wall. She'd reached the hay barn, was climbing the wooden support beams to the roof. Her movements were fluid despite her injuries, a testament to Apache training and iron will. Midnight. A flash of light. The whoosh of ignition. And suddenly the eastern sky was ablaze, flames leaping 30 feet into the air, the dry hay catching like tinder, the heat so intense Thomas could feel it from 100 yards away. Shouts of alarm. Running feet. Bells ringing. Men streaming from the bunkhouse in various states of undress, buckets in hand, panic in their movements. Thomas counted. 5 men running toward the fire. That left 2, Clayton and 1 other. Exactly as planned. He raised the Winchester to his shoulder, took a breath, let it out slowly, and fired. The shot cracked across the compound like a thunderclap. A guard running toward the fire stumbled mid-stride, then collapsed face first into the dust. He hit the ground and didn't move. For a moment everything froze. Men stopped mid-stride, trying to understand where the shot had come from, trying to process that this wasn't just a fire, it was an attack. Then all hell broke loose. Vicente's squad burst from the southern tree line, rifles blazing. The root cellar door exploded outward as Thomas's people charged into the open, and from the north barn roof, Ayanna began picking targets with methodical precision. The Battle of Crimson Valley Ranch had begun, and in the main house Clayton Reeves stared out the window at the chaos unfolding before him, his face pale with rage and recognition. Thomas Brennan was alive, and he'd come home to collect what was owed. The compound erupted into chaos and gunfire. The hay barn blazed like a beacon against the night sky, flames climbing higher with each passing second, casting everything in flickering orange light that turned men into dancing shadows. Thomas squeezed off another round. A guard diving behind a wagon wheel jerked and went still. 2 down, 5 to go. From the south, Vicente's squad advanced in a ragged line, firing as they came. The old vaquero moved like a man half his age, dropping to one knee behind a water trough to reload, then rising to fire again. Beside him, 3 ranch hands who'd never shot at anything but coyotes and rattlesnakes were learning the hard way that men died differently than animals. One of Clayton's hired guns, a lean man with a scar running down his neck, tried to rally a defense near the corral. He shouted orders, waving men into position. Then his head snapped back and he crumpled. From the barn roof, Ayanna worked her rifle's bolt action and found her next target. Thomas sprinted across open ground to better cover behind the blacksmith's forge. Bullets kicked up dust around his feet. One tugged at his sleeve. Another ricocheted off the forge with a metallic scream, but he made it sliding into cover as return fire chewed the air where he'd been. "Mr. Brennan." Miguel emerged from the cellar, a pistol in each hand, his young face set with determination. Behind him came the others, spreading out, finding cover, adding their fire to the assault. Maria the cook ran past Thomas toward the main house, a shotgun cradled in her arms. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this before in another war, in another life. A guard stepped around the corner directly into her path. She didn't hesitate. The shotgun roared and the man flew backward, his chest torn open. "For my son," she screamed into the night. "You killed my son." Thomas hadn't known that the worker who'd disappeared 2 days ago had been Maria's boy, hadn't known the depth of rage that had been building in her heart. But he knew now, and he understood that this battle was about more than just taking back a ranch. It was about justice for every small crime, every cruel word, every life destroyed by men like Clayton Reeves. A bullet smashed into the forge inches from Thomas's head, showering him with sparks. He rolled left, came up firing. The shooter, a heavy-set man with a bandolier across his chest, stumbled and fell. 3 down. From the north barn, Ayanna's rifle cracked again. And again. She was firing with mechanical precision, 1 shot every 10 seconds. Each shot found flesh. Each shot dropped a man. Thomas had underestimated her. The bow and the rifle might use different mechanisms, but the principle was the same. Find the target. Breathe. Release. Vicente's squad had reached the bunkhouse and were using it for cover. One of Clayton's men tried to flank them, running low along the fence line. Vicente tracked him calmly, led him by 2 feet, and fired. The man's leg exploded in a spray of red, and he went down screaming. "Do not kill him," Vicente shouted. "Let him bleed." Let the others hear him scream. It was a brutal tactic, but effective. The sound of the wounded man's agony rippled across the compound, sapping the will of the defenders. Men fighting for money could accept death, but suffering was another matter. Thomas reloaded the Winchester, his hands moving with the muscle memory of war. 15 rounds gone, 12 left. He'd need to make them count. He scanned the compound, trying to locate Clayton. The foreman hadn't shown himself yet. Was probably in the main house, watching, calculating, trying to figure out how this had all gone so wrong. A group of 3 guards had fortified themselves behind an overturned wagon near the well. They were laying down, suppressing fire, keeping Thomas's people pinned. One of Vicente's men tried to rush them and took a bullet in the shoulder, spinning down into the dust. Thomas whistled a sharp 2-tone signal. Ayanna would recognize it. He pointed toward the wagon. She shifted her position on the roof, found the angle, and fired 3 times in rapid succession. 2 of the men behind the wagon jerked and fell. The third broke and ran, making it 5 steps before Maria's shotgun cut him down. 7 down. Only Clayton remains. The battle had been raging for perhaps 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. The hay barn was fully engulfed now, collapsing in on itself in a shower of sparks that rose toward the stars. The heat was intense enough that Thomas could feel it from 100 feet away. Then everything changed. A door slammed open at the main house. Clayton Reeves emerged onto the porch, and he wasn't alone. He had Talasi. His left arm was wrapped around the girl's throat, pulling her tight against his body as a shield. His right hand pressed a pistol to her temple. Her face was pale with terror tears streaming down her cheeks. "Brennan!" Clayton's voice cut through the gunfire. "Brennan, I know you're out there." Thomas felt ice flood his veins. How had Clayton gotten the girl? She was supposed to be at the cave miles away, safe, protected. Then he understood. Someone must have followed them, must have tracked them back to their hiding place and taken Talasi as insurance. Clayton had always been thorough, had always planned for contingencies. "Drop your weapons," Clayton shouted. Drop them now, or I scatter this little Apache's brains all over my porch." The shooting stopped. An eerie silence fell over the compound, broken only by the roar of flames and the moaning of wounded men. Thomas rose slowly from behind the forge, Winchester still in his hands, but lowered. "Let her go, Clayton. This is between you and me." "No." Clayton's face was twisted with rage and something else. Fear. The fear of a man watching his carefully constructed plans crumble into ash. "This is between me and everything you represent, every lie you ever told yourself about equality and justice." His voice rose to a scream, spittle flying. "The Confederacy should have won, should have burned this whole territory to the ground and started over. Built something pure, something right. But men like you Union dogs, you destroyed that dream, and now you treat these Indians and Mexicans like they're people, like they're equal." Thomas took a careful step forward. Clayton tightened his grip on Talassi, making her whimper. Thomas stopped. "I fought at Shiloh Brennan at Antietam. I watched my brothers die in your prison camps. And for what? So you could build your perfect little ranch where the and the Redskins and the Greasers all work side by side. Your brothers died for a cause that deserved to die." Thomas said, his voice cold and level. "They died defending the right to own human beings, to treat people as property. If that's the legacy you're fighting for, then you're already lost." "I'm not lost. I'm the only one who sees clearly." Clayton's gun hand trembled against Talassi's head. "This ranch should be a white man's fortress, a place of order and proper hierarchy. But you ruined it, poisoned it with your weak, sentimental nonsense. Is that why you beat Ayanna? Why you drove her into the desert to die because she saved my life? She's a savage. She had no right to touch you, no right to use her witchcraft." "It wasn't witchcraft, you ignorant fool. It was medicine. Knowledge her people have preserved for generations, while men like you were burning books and lynching teachers." Clayton's face purpled with rage. "I'm going to kill this girl. Then I'm going to kill you. And then I'm going to take this ranch and turn it into what it should have been all along, a monument to proper civilization." Thomas met Talassi's terrified eyes, saw the plea there, saw the same fear he'd seen in Daniel's eyes as the fever consumed him. That helpless, desperate need for salvation that no father could bear to witness. "Please," Talassi whispered, "please don't let him hurt my sister." "Your sister?" Clayton laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your sister is already dead. I sent men to that cave. They'll have killed her by now. You're alone, little Indian, alone and about to join her." Something cold and terrible settled over Thomas. A calm he recognized from the war. The moment when fear burned away and all that remained was purpose. He'd felt it at Chancellorsville when the Confederate line broke and it was kill or die. Felt it at Gettysburg when the artillery barrage turned the world into hell and only the dead found peace. He felt it now. "Vicente," he said quietly, "when I move, you move. Understand, si, senor. Miguel, Maria, everyone. When Clayton dies, the rest break. Chase them down. No mercy for men who take children hostage." "Clayton," Thomas called out, his voice carrying across the compound, "you made one mistake, just one, but it's going to cost you everything." "What mistake?" Clayton sneered. "You assumed I was the only one who cared about this girl." A rifle cracked from the barn roof. Clayton's shoulder exploded in a spray of red as Ayanna's bullet struck home, shattering bone and sinew. His gun hand flew wide. Talassi broke free and ran stumbling down the porch steps, screaming for her sister. Thomas was already moving. His hand dropped to the derringer in his boot, the two-shot pistol he'd carried since the war. A weapon of last resort. A weapon for when the distance was close and the stakes were absolute. He raised it and fired both barrels into Clayton Reeves's chest. Boom! Boom! The reports were massive in the confined space, echoing off the buildings like thunder. Clayton stood swaying on the porch, his mouth working soundlessly. Blood spread across his shirt in a dark tide that looked black in the firelight. His pistol slipped from nerveless fingers and clattered on the wooden boards. "You," he gasped. "You can't." "I just did." Clayton's legs buckled. He collapsed backward onto the porch, his body making a heavy thump. His eyes stared up at the smoke-filled sky, but they saw nothing, would never see anything again. For a moment, silence. Then chaos again as the remaining guards broke and ran. 2 made it 10 feet before Vicente's squad cut them down. The third, the man with the wounded leg, raised his hands in surrender, screaming for quarter. "Take him alive," Thomas ordered. "The sheriff will want someone to testify." The battle was over. Thomas walked slowly toward the main house, his legs suddenly weak, the adrenaline draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. Around him, his people were securing the compound, checking bodies, tending to the wounded. The hay barn had collapsed completely, but the main structures were intact. The ranch would survive. Talasi ran past him, calling for her sister. "Ayana, Ayana!" From the barn roof, a figure descended. Ayana climbed down with careful movements, her back clearly paining her, but alive. Very much alive. She reached the ground and Talasi threw herself into her arms, both of them crying, holding each other like shipwreck survivors clinging to wreckage. Vicente approached Thomas, his face smeared with powder burns and dust. "It is done, senor. The ranch is yours again." "How many did we lose?" "2 dead, 4 wounded, but they will live. God was with us tonight." "God or luck? I'm not sure there's a difference." Thomas looked at the old vaquero, at the man who'd stood beside him through everything. "Thank you, old friend. I couldn't have done this without you." "You would have tried anyway. That is why I follow you. Because you are the kind of fool who fights for what is right, even when it is hopeless." Vicente smiled. "Your father was the same. It is a good kind of foolishness." Maria was kneeling beside one of the bodies, her face streaked with tears. Thomas approached carefully. "Maria, are you hurt?" "No, senor." She looked up at him. "This one. This is the man who killed my Roberto, who shot him in the back when he questioned Clayton's orders. I wanted you to know. I wanted you to know that justice was done tonight." Thomas knelt beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry about your son. I didn't know. If I had known, I would have acted sooner." "You acted when you could. That is all any man can do." She stood wiping her eyes. "Now we bury our dead and tend our wounded. Life continues. It always continues." Ayana approached, still holding Talasi's hand. Her face was drawn with pain and exhaustion, but her eyes were clear. "You kept your promise. You took back your ranch." "We kept our promise, all of us together." Thomas gestured to the compound, to the people moving through the firelight. "This isn't my victory, it's ours. What happens now? Now the law comes. Sheriff Dawson will arrive by afternoon. We give him testimony, show him the evidence, let justice work the way it's supposed to work." Thomas paused. "And then we rebuild. We make this ranch into something better than it was, something worth the blood that was spilled tonight." Ayana studied his face. "You are different than you were 3 days ago, lighter somehow, as if a weight has been lifted." "Maybe it has. I've spent 2 years carrying grief like a stone around my neck. Tonight I set it down. I'll always miss Martha and Daniel, always. But I can't live in the past anymore. I have to live in the present. For them. For everyone." The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, the stars fading as dawn approached. Thomas walked to the porch and looked down at Clayton's body, the man who'd betrayed him, who'd stolen and lied and beaten an innocent woman, who'd held a child at gunpoint and boasted about it. He felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief, just emptiness where rage had been. "Senor." Miguel stood at the bottom of the steps. "What should we do with him?" "Wrap him in canvas. We'll bury him outside town. No marker, no ceremony, just dirt and darkness. Let the coyotes sing him to whatever hell waits for men like him. As the sun rose over Crimson Valley Ranch, Thomas stood on the porch and watched his people work. They were cleaning up the compound, putting out the last of the fires, tending to horses spooked by gunfire. They moved with purpose, with unity, with the quiet satisfaction of people who'd stood up to evil and won. Vicente joined him. "It is a good morning, senor." "Yes, yes it is. But you know it is not over. Men like Clayton, they always have brothers, family who will come seeking revenge." Thomas nodded slowly. He'd been thinking the same thing. Let them come. We'll be ready. This ranch has survived Apache raids, droughts, and civil war. It'll survive whatever comes next. As long as we stand together. As long as we stand together, Thomas agreed. Ayanna climbed the porch steps, moving stiffly. "Your shoulder. Let me look at that wound." Thomas glanced down. A bullet had grazed him during the fight, tearing his shirt and leaving a bloody furrow across his upper arm. He hadn't even felt it in the heat of battle. "It's nothing. Nothing can become infection. Infection can become death. I did not save your life twice just to watch you die of stubbornness." Despite everything, Thomas smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She cleaned the wound with water from the well, then applied a poultice made from herbs she carried in a leather pouch. Her hands were gentle but sure, the touch of someone who'd done this many times before. "This will keep the poison out," she said. "Change the bandage twice a day. Keep it clean." "You sound like my mother." "Your mother was a wise woman then." They stood together on the porch, watching the sun climb higher, watching the ranch come back to life. In the distance, a rider appeared on the road from Phoenix, the sheriff most likely, coming to investigate the smoke and gunfire. "Are you ready to tell him everything?" Ayanna asked. "I am. The truth from beginning to end. Let the law decide what happens next. The law has not been kind to my people. Then maybe it's time for that to change. We've got evidence, witnesses, a phonograph recording. If the law won't do what's right with all that, then the law itself is broken." Sheriff Dawson arrived an hour later with 4 deputies. He was a solid man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much and believed too little. He surveyed the compound with a practiced gaze, taking in the bodies, the burned barn, the armed ranch hands. "Mr. Brennan," he said, dismounting slowly, "I got your letter. Didn't expect to find quite this much enthusiasm when I arrived. Had to move faster than planned. Clayton was going to execute the prisoners. So you say. You." The sheriff's eyes fell on Ayanna. "This the Apache woman. This is Ayanna. She saved my life. Clayton beat her for it." "Got proof of that?" Thomas handed him the wax cylinder. "A recording of the entire incident, made on an Edison phonograph. You can hear everything. The sounds of her saving me, Clayton beating her, his lies, all of it." The sheriff turned the cylinder over in his hands. "Never thought I'd see the day when a machine could testify in court. But I'll listen to it. If it says what you claim, this is open and shut." "And the Apache woman?" Thomas asked carefully. "She's under my protection, my employ. She works as the ranch medic. Anyone who has a problem with that answers to me." Sheriff Dawson looked at Ayanna for a long moment. Finally he nodded. "Unusual, but not illegal. Long as she don't cause trouble, I got no quarrel with her." "She won't cause trouble. She'll save lives. It's what she does." The sheriff spent 3 hours interviewing witnesses, examining bodies, listening to the phonograph recording. When he was done, he pulled Thomas aside. "This is as clean a case of self-defense as I've ever seen. Clayton Reeves and his men get what they deserved. I'll file a full report with the territorial judge. You should be clear within a week." "Thank you, Sheriff." "Don't thank me. Thank whoever invented that recording machine. Without it, this would be your word against a dead man's. And that tends not to go well, especially with an Indian woman involved." He glanced at Ayanna. "You keep her safe, Brennan. There's men in this territory who won't take kindly to what you're doing here." "I know." but some things are worth fighting for. Apparently. The sheriff mounted his horse. I'll send an undertaker for the bodies. You bury them wherever you want. Far as I'm concerned, they don't deserve a Christian burial. As the sheriff rode away, Thomas felt the last bit of tension leave his shoulders. It was truly over. The battle was won. The ranch was his again. And more importantly, it would become what it should have been all along, a place of justice, of equality, of honor. He looked at the people gathered in the yard. Vicente, Maria, Miguel, the other workers, Ayana and Talasi, his family, not by blood but by choice, by struggle, by the bonds forged in fire. "Listen up," he called out. "I have an announcement to make." The workers gathered in the yard, their faces etched with exhaustion and something else. Hope, perhaps. Or maybe just the quiet satisfaction of people who'd stood up to evil and lived to tell the tale. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of smoke from the destroyed hay barn. Thomas stood on the porch steps, his arm freshly bandaged, his voice carrying across the compound. What happened here last night was about more than taking back stolen property. It was about standing up for what's right, about refusing to accept that might makes right. He paused, letting his words settle. For too long I've run this ranch the way most ranches are run. Fair wages, yes. Equal treatment mostly. But still, at the end of the day, it was my ranch. My rules. My profits. That changes today. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vicente's eyebrows rose. From this day forward, Crimson Valley Ranch operates on a partnership model. Every worker who stood with us last night gets a share of the annual profits. 10% of everything this ranch earns gets divided equally among you. You're not just employees anymore. You're stakeholders. You have a voice in how this place is run. Maria crossed herself. Miguel's eyes went wide. The vaqueros looked at each other in disbelief. Furthermore, Thomas continued, we're establishing a medical station. Ayana will run it. She'll provide care for all workers and their families, free of charge. No one on this ranch will die of treatable illness or infection if we can prevent it. He turned to Ayana. If you'll accept the position. She stepped forward, Talasi still clinging to her hand. I accept. On one condition. I also teach. I train others in healing arts, both Apache medicine and white medicine. Knowledge dies when it is hoarded. It lives when it is shared. Agreed. Thomas looked back at the assembled workers. We're also setting up a school fund. Any child of a Crimson Valley worker who wants education will get it. We'll pay for books, tuition, whatever's needed. The future belongs to the young. Our job is to prepare them for it. Vicente approached the steps, his weathered face split by a rare smile. Senor Thomas, your father would be proud. This is what he dreamed of when he first broke this land. A place where a man's worth was measured by his character, not his skin. My father taught me that dignity has no color. It took me too long to fully understand what he meant, but I understand now. Thomas's voice grew softer. My son taught me the same lesson in his own way. He asked me once why we had so much when others had so little. I told him that's just how the world works. He looked at me with those disappointed eyes and said, But Papa, don't we have the power to change how the world works? He was 15 years old. And he was absolutely right. The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. So, yes, we change how the world works. At least our small corner of it. We build something that lasts. Something that means something. Not just a ranch, but a community. A family. Thomas gestured to the compound, to the land beyond. This place has Brennan blood in the soil. 3 generations of it. But it also has Vicente's sweat and Maria's tears and the hopes of every person who's ever worked here. That makes it ours. All of ours. The cheering started slowly, then built like a wave. Men embraced, women wept. Children who'd been hiding during the battle emerged and ran through the yard laughing with the relief of danger past. Ayana climbed the steps to stand beside Thomas. You risk much with these changes. Your neighbors will not approve. Let them disapprove. I'm too old and too tired to care what small-minded men think of me. You are 47. That is not old. Feels old some days. Thomas looked at her, this young woman who'd saved his life and fought beside him. But then again, some days I feel younger than I have in years. Purpose has a way of taking decades off a man. The same is true for women. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the celebration below. Talassi had joined the other children, her earlier terror already fading into the resilience of youth. Vicente was distributing whiskey from his private stock, toasting the fallen and the living with equal reverence. "There is something I must tell you," Ayana said quietly. "Something about last night." "What is it?" Clayton lied. When he said his men had gone to the cave to kill me, that was a lie meant to cause pain. "How do you know?" "Because I sent Talassi to the cave to hide while I positioned myself on the barn roof. When I arrived at my position just before midnight, I saw 2 of Clayton's men returning from the northwest, the direction of the cave. They had Talassi with them, bound and gagged. They must have tracked our movements earlier and found our hiding place." She paused, her jaw tightening. "I wanted to climb down and rescue her immediately, but there were guards everywhere, and I knew if I revealed myself before the fire started, the entire plan would fail. So I waited. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, watching them take my sister into that house and knowing I could do nothing until the signal." "You made the right choice. A hard choice, but the right one." "I know. But that does not make it easier." She met his eyes. "I was on the barn roof the entire time. If Clayton's men had gone to kill me at the cave after taking Talassi, I would have seen them leave. But they never did. He lied to hurt you, nothing more." Thomas absorbed this. "So he was just trying to hurt me, to make me think you'd died?" "Yes. Even in his last moments he chose cruelty." Ayana's face was thoughtful. "Such men are dangerous not because they are strong, but because they cannot imagine another way to live. Violence is all they understand. Power is all they respect. Which is why men like that can never truly win. They might conquer. They might dominate. But they never build anything that lasts, because fear is a poor foundation for legacy." "What will you build your legacy on?" Thomas considered the question. "On the idea that every person deserves dignity, that working together makes us stronger than standing alone, that the measure of a civilization isn't how wealthy its richest citizens are, but how well it treats its most vulnerable." He smiled ruefully. "Grand words. Let's see if I can live up to them." "You already have. Last night proved that." The day passed in a blur of activity. Bodies were removed and buried in unmarked graves outside town as Thomas had ordered. The wounded were tended, their injuries cleaned and bandaged. The destroyed hay barn was cleared away, the timber salvaged for other uses. By evening, the compound looked almost normal, except for the bullet holes in the walls, the bloodstains in the dirt, the memory of violence that would take longer to fade. Thomas spent the afternoon in his office updating the ranch ledgers, writing letters to suppliers and buyers, trying to piece together what Clayton had stolen or destroyed. The numbers were worse than he'd feared. 200 head of cattle gone, likely sold to Mexican dealers and impossible to recover. $3,000 missing from the ranch accounts. Equipment sold or given away. But the land remained. The buildings remained. And most importantly, the people remained. That was enough to rebuild on. A knock at the door. Vicente entered carrying a bottle and 2 glasses. "Señor, you have been working for 6 hours. Time to rest." "Can't rest. Too much to do." "The work will be there tomorrow. Tonight we drink. We remember those who fell. We celebrate those who survived." Vicente poured 2 generous measures. "Your father and I used to do this after every hard day. It is good tradition." Thomas accepted the glass. "Tell me something. Did you ever doubt we'd succeed last night?" "Many times. But doubt does not prevent action. It only makes success sweeter." Vicente drank deeply. "Your father once told me that courage is not the absence of fear. It is being afraid and doing what must be done anyway. You showed great courage last night, Senor. So did you. So did everyone. See, but it started with you. You could have stayed in that bed, claimed weakness, let Clayton take everything. No one would have blamed you, but instead you rose, you fought, you inspired others to fight beside you. That is leadership. Thomas stared into his glass. I wish my son could have seen last night. Could have seen that the values we talked about aren't just words. He saw it, Senor. Children always know when their parents live with honor. They drank in silence, the whiskey burning smooth and warm. Vicente, can I ask you something? Something personal. Of course, Senor. Why did you stay all these years? You could have gone anywhere, done anything. Why stay with the Brennan family? The old vaquero stared into his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the lamplight. When I first came to this territory, I was running, from debts in Sonora, from men who wanted me dead. I was 30 years old and certain I would not see 31. He refilled both glasses. Your father found me half dead in the desert. He brought me here, fed me, gave me work. But more than that, he gave me dignity. He never asked about my past, never treated me as less than human. He simply accepted that I was a man who needed a second chance. Vicente's eyes grew distant. One night, 3 years after I arrived, bandits raided the ranch. Your father and I fought them off, just the two of us, against 8 men. When it was over, I said, Senor Brennan, I have repaid my debt. If you wish, I will leave in the morning. You know what he said? Thomas shook his head. He said, Vicente, you never owed me a debt. You owed yourself a second chance. I just provided the ground for you to plant it. Now it has grown into something strong. Why would you leave your own garden? Vicente's voice grew thick. That day I understood. This was not his ranch I was working. It was ours, mine as much as his. That is why I stayed. That is why I will never leave. Thomas felt his throat tighten. My father was a wise man. See, and you are his son. The apple does not fall far from the tree. Thomas felt his throat tighten. Thank you. For everything. For believing in us. For standing beside us. There is nowhere else I would rather stand. As night fell over Crimson Valley, Ayanna came to the office. She carried a leather bag filled with medical supplies and a concerned expression. Your shoulder. I need to check it again. Thomas allowed her to unwrap the bandage and examine the wound. Her fingers were gentle but thorough, probing the edges of the injury, checking for signs of infection. It is clean. Healing well. You were lucky. A few inches lower and the bullet would have hit the artery. Seems I've been lucky a lot lately. Or maybe I just have good people watching over me. She smiled as she applied fresh bandages. Luck and good people often look the same from the outside. But I think it is the second. You have surrounded yourself with those who care. That is not luck. That is wisdom. Ayanna, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. I am always honest. This ranch, this life, is it what you want? Or are you staying out of obligation because the debt is paid? You don't owe me anything. She finished tying off the bandage before answering. When I was a child, my grandmother told me a story about a warrior who was saved by a stranger. The warrior tried to repay his debt with gifts, gold, horses, fine weapons, but the stranger refused them all. Finally, the warrior asked what the stranger wanted, and the stranger said, I want you to live a life worthy of the gift I gave you. That is the only payment I require. Ayanna met his eyes. You saved my life in that canyon. I saved yours at the ranch. The debts are equal and balanced, but that is not why I stay. I stay because for the first time in my life, I see a place where my people and your people might live together without hatred, where knowledge can be shared instead of hoarded, where children of all colors can learn and grow. She paused. I stay because this feels like the future my grandmother dreamed of, and I want to be part of building it. Even knowing how dangerous it might be, there will be others like Clayton, men who hate what we're trying to do here. I know. But running from danger does not make one safe. It only makes one alone. She tilted her head. You understand this. It is why you fought last night, why you fight every day to be better than the world expects you to be. Thomas nodded slowly. Then we build this future together, all of us, and we deal with whatever comes. Yes, together. She left him alone in the office, and Thomas returned to his paperwork. But his mind kept drifting to the future, to the school they would build, the medical station, the partnerships and shared profits. It was ambitious, perhaps impossibly so. But then again his father had started with nothing but a wagon and a dream. If he could build a ranch from empty desert, surely Thomas could build a community from that foundation. The door opened again. This time it was Miguel, the young man who'd made the phonograph recording. Mr. Brennan, sir, I wanted to thank you for what you said today about profit sharing and education. My little sister, she's smart, really smart. But we could never afford to send her to school in Phoenix. Now maybe she can go. Maybe she can become something more than a ranch hand's daughter. That's the idea, Miguel. Give the next generation opportunities we never had. Let them fly higher than we ever could. I also wanted to tell you something. About last night. When we were in that cellar waiting to fight, I was terrified. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the rifle. But then I thought about what you'd said. About this being our home. About fighting for family. And the fear didn't go away, but it became manageable. Because I wasn't fighting for you. I was fighting for us, for all of us. Thomas stood and gripped the young man's shoulder. That's what makes the difference. When people fight because they're ordered to, they fight half-heartedly. But when they fight for something they believe in, they become unstoppable. You proved that last night. After Miguel left, Thomas finally allowed himself to feel the exhaustion. His body ached, his shoulder throbbed, his head felt stuffed with cotton, but beneath it all was a satisfaction deeper than anything he'd felt in years. He walked to the small shrine in his bedroom, the photographs of Martha and Daniel, the cross, the blood-stained uniform scrap. I did it, he whispered. I took back what was ours, and I'm making it into something better, something that would make you proud. He touched Martha's photograph. I found a reason to keep going, not a replacement for you. Never that. But a purpose, a way forward. He imagined he could hear her voice, that gentle knowing tone she'd used when he was being stubborn or foolish. I'm glad, Thomas. It's about time you rejoined the living. I miss you, both of you, every day. We know. But we also want you to be happy, to live fully, to honor our memory by creating something beautiful from the pain. Thomas wiped his eyes. I'm trying. God knows I'm trying. He slept that night without nightmares for the first time in 2 years. 3 days later, Sheriff Dawson returned with official papers. All charges cleared, self-defense confirmed. The ranch legally and completely Thomas's again with no claims or liens. But he also brought a warning. Mr. Brennan, I need to tell you something. Man came through Phoenix yesterday asking questions about Clayton Reeves. Said he was kin, a younger brother. Thomas felt ice slide down his spine. Did he leave a name? Called himself Silas Reeves, bounty hunter by trade. Killed 23 men, all legal. Criminals with prices on their heads. The sheriff's face was grim. He's not like Clayton, not stupid or emotional. He's cold, professional, dangerous as a rattlesnake and twice as patient. What did you tell him? The truth. That his brother tried to steal your ranch, that he beat an innocent woman, that he took a child hostage, that he died in a fair fight after you gave him every chance to surrender. Sheriff Dawson handed over a piece of paper. He left this for you. Thomas unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, almost elegant. Mr. Brennan, my brother wrote me about you before he died, told me about your ranch, your bleeding heart, your Apache woman. He said if anything happened to him, I should come collect his debts. I always honor family obligations. I will arrive in 6 months. Use that time wisely. Make peace with your God. Say goodbye to those you love, because when I come, I will take everything from you. Not your life. That would be too quick. But everything that makes your life worth living, your land, your people, your dignity. I will systematically destroy everything you've built. And you will watch. And you will know that it is because you killed my brother. Blood calls for blood. Always. Silas Reeves. Thomas read it twice, then handed it to Vicente, who joined them on the porch. The old vaquero's face darkened. This is a man who means what he says. I know. 6 months. We have 6 months to prepare. Or 6 months to live. Thomas looked out over the ranch at the workers going about their business at Ayana, teaching Talasi how to set a broken bone at the life they were building. Either way, we don't stop. We keep building, keep improving, keep creating something worth defending. Sheriff Dawson shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Brennan, a man like Silas Reeves, he doesn't fight fair. He'll use the law against you, frame you for crimes, turn your workers against you, destroy you piece by piece until there's nothing left. Then we'll have to be smarter than he is, and we'll have to stick together, because men like Silas rely on dividing people, making them turn on each other. If we stay united, he can't win. I hope you're right. The sheriff mounted his horse. I'll be watching. If he steps outside the law, I'll stop him. But if he stays legal, there's not much I can do. After the sheriff left, Vicente turned to Thomas. You know he will come. I know. And you know we will fight beside you. I know that too. Thomas put his arm around the old man's shoulders. But that's a problem for tomorrow. Today we've got a ranch to run, a community to build, a future to create. Let Silas Reeves come if he must. We'll be ready. Ayana approached, having overheard the conversation. This man, he is dangerous. Very. Then we prepare, we train, we fortify, and we face him together when the time comes. She looked at Thomas with those fierce, unbreakable eyes. You did not save me from the canyon so I could run from threats. I stand with you. Whatever comes. Thomas felt something shift in his chest. Not love exactly. Not yet. But the potential for it. The recognition that this woman, this warrior healer who'd been a stranger 2 weeks ago, had become something essential to his life. Thank you, he said simply. That evening, Thomas called another meeting. All the workers gathered in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. You've heard by now about Silas Reeves, about the threat he poses. I won't lie to you. He's dangerous. He's skilled. And he's coming for us. Thomas paused, letting that sink in. Any of you who want to leave, I understand. I'll write you references, pay you bonuses, help you find work elsewhere. No hard feelings, no judgment. No one moved. But if you stay, you need to know what you're staying for. We're not just defending a ranch, we're defending an idea. The idea that people of different colors, different backgrounds, different beliefs can work together, can build something beautiful together. That dignity and respect aren't limited resources to be hoarded by a few, but infinite qualities that grow stronger when shared. Maria stepped forward. Mr. Brennan, my son died because he believed in what you're building here. If I leave now, his death means nothing. I stay. Miguel raised his hand. My family has nowhere else to go. But more than that, we don't want to go. This is our home. We stay. One by one, every worker declared their intention to remain, to fight if necessary, to build regardless of threats. Vicente smiled. It seems you have your answer, Senor. We are with you. Until the end. Thomas felt tears prick his eyes, but refused to let them fall. Then we make this place stronger. We build walls if we must. We train if necessary. But mostly we keep living, keep working, keep proving that the future we imagine is possible. Because that's the best revenge against men like Silas. Not killing them, but building something so strong, so beautiful, so right, that their hatred becomes irrelevant. As the meeting broke up and people returned to their evening meals, Thomas stood on the porch and watched the stars emerge. Somewhere out there, Silas Reeves was planning, preparing, sharpening his tools for destruction. But here in Crimson Valley, life was growing, healing, becoming something new. The wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. In the medical station, Ayanna was teaching 3 women the basics of wound care. In the bunkhouse, Vicente was telling stories to the children, passing down wisdom earned over 70 years of survival. In the main house, Thomas's ledgers showed the first glimmers of profit after the disaster. "Martha," Thomas whispered to the night. "Daniel, I know you can't hear me, but if you can, I want you to know something. I'm finally living again, not just existing. Living, building, creating, loving in my own way. And it's because of the values you taught me, the courage you gave me, the example you set." He touched the scar on his face, tracing it from temple to jaw, a mark of violence that had ultimately led to salvation, a wound that had connected him across decades to the woman who'd saved his life. 6 months until Silas arrives, 6 months to prepare, to build, to grow stronger. Thomas smiled into the darkness. "Let him come. We'll be ready, not because we're eager for violence, but because we've found something worth protecting. And there's no force in the world stronger than people who've decided their cause is just." The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The coyotes began their nightly chorus. And in Crimson Valley Ranch a new chapter was beginning, one written not in blood and conquest, but in partnership and hope. The future was uncertain. The threats were real. But for the first time in years, Thomas Brennan faced that uncertain future with something more than grim determination. He faced it with joy, and that made all the difference.